Unmasking the Control, My Mother-in-Law's Shocking Realization. From the moment my mother-in-law, Evelyn, moved into our house, everything in my life felt like it was spiraling out of control. I had always known that she didn't like me, but I never imagined how far she would go to make me feel unwelcome in my own home. It was Jake, my husband, who had suggested that she move in with us, citing her health and the need for family support. I was hesitant, to say the least, but Jake was persistent. "She's getting old, Sarah. We need to be there for her," he'd said, his voice soft but firm. I knew he felt an obligation, but I also knew deep down that this would be the beginning of something far more sinister. Little did I realize, Evelyn wasn't just moving into our home. She was planning to take over it entirely. In the first few weeks, she was on her best behavior. She acted polite, even going out of her way to compliment my cooking and housekeeping, which I found suspicious. It felt too forced, and I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it didn't take long. The slow burn of passive-aggressive comments soon turned into direct criticism. "I've always done it this way," she would say when I cleaned the kitchen, as though my methods were inferior. "Jake prefers his meals prepared this way, you know," she'd mention during dinner, casually belittling my cooking. Jake, of course, didn't notice a thing. He was blind to it all, seeing only his loving mother, who he believed had my best interests at heart. I felt trapped between pleasing my husband and protecting my dignity. One particularly stressful day, after I had just returned from a long meeting at work, I walked into the house only to find that Evelyn had crossed the line. My eyes widened as I took in the scene before me. There, piled up in the corner of the living room, were several garbage bags stuffed with my things. Clothes I'd carefully folded and placed in my wardrobe, books I had kept on our shelves, framed photos of my family. All of it was shoved into those bags like unwanted trash. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with disbelief. Evelyn was sitting on the couch, her feet propped up on the coffee table, sipping a cup of tea as though nothing was wrong. She barely looked up at me, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm just decluttering. This house is a mess, and Jake told me I could help organize things." "My things?" I snapped. "You had no right to touch my belongings." Evelyn finally turned to face me, an icy smirk on her lips. "Sarah, you're married to my son now. This is his house, and we need to make sure it's kept the way it should be. You don't need so much clutter." The word hung in the air like a dagger aimed at my chest. Before I could retort, Jake walked in, taking in the scene. I expected him to stand up for me, to tell his mother she had crossed a line, but instead he shrugged, clearly oblivious to the gravity of what had just happened. "Mom's just trying to help, honey. Don't overreact," he said casually, before disappearing into the kitchen, leaving me standing there, dumbfounded and betrayed. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep, feeling the weight of Evelyn's control over my life, pressing down on me. She had always viewed this house as Jake's, never ours. To her, I was just an accessory, someone who could easily be dismissed or replaced. And now, it seemed, she was pushing me to the edge, trying to force me out of my own home. The days that followed were a blur of tension. Evelyn seemed to revel in her newfound control. She began redecorating certain parts of the house without consulting me, moving my things into storage, and even making comments to Jake about how things were better now. The worst part was that Jake seemed to agree, or at least he didn't question her. My frustration grew, and I knew something had to give. Then came the final straw. One afternoon, I arrived home from work to find Evelyn sitting in my study, rifling through my papers. I froze in the doorway, watching in disbelief as she rummaged through important documents, her fingers deftly flipping through our financial records and personal files. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight with anger. She didn't even flinch. "I'm just making sure everything is in order. You wouldn't want anything to get lost, would you?" she said, her voice sweet and condescending. I marched over, grabbing the papers from her hands. "You have no right to be in here. These are private documents." Evelyn stood up slowly, her expression cold. I have every right. This is my son's house, and I'm simply looking out for his interests. Maybe you should too. I stared at her in disbelief, my heart racing. She wasn't just trying to control the house, she was trying to control our lives. It was then that I noticed something. Among the papers she had been rifling through were the ownership documents for the house. And in that moment, everything became clear. I snatched the documents from the desk and quickly scanned through them. There it was, in black and white, my name, listed as co-owner of the house. My father had helped me purchase this home long before Jake and I were married. It wasn't just Jake's house, it was ours, mine just as much as his. Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she watched me. She didn't know. She had no idea that the very house she was trying to take control of wasn't solely in her son's name. She had been operating under the assumption that I had no claim to anything, that I was just some guest in her son's domain. That night, I confronted Jake. Jake, we need to talk, I said, my voice calm but determined, as I laid the house ownership papers on the dining table. He looked confused at first, picking up the documents and scanning them, his brows furrowed in confusion. What's this? He asked. It's the ownership papers for the house, I said, watching his face closely. I co-own this house, Jake. My father helped me buy it before we got married. This isn't just your house. This is our house, and your mother has no right to act like it's hers to control. Jake's eyes widened as he realized what I was saying. You own the house too? Yes, I said firmly, and I've let this go on for too long. Your mother has been treating me like an outsider in my own home. She's thrown out my things, redecorated without my consent, and even went through our private papers. It has to stop, Jake. This is our home, not hers. The look on Jake's face was a mix of shock and guilt. He had been so caught up in trying to please his mother that he hadn't realized the damage she was doing to our marriage. The next morning, I confronted Evelyn. Evelyn, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady as I walked into the kitchen where she sat sipping her coffee. She looked up at me with her usual smug expression, clearly not expecting what was about to happen. What is it now, Sarah? Are you still upset about the clutter? I placed the house papers in front of her. Actually, it's about the house. You seem to think this is Jake's house, but you're wrong. I co-own it. Evelyn's face paled as she stared at the documents, her hand trembling slightly. What? What do you mean? She stammered. I mean, I said, savoring the moment. This is my house too, and you've overstepped your boundaries. Jake walked in at that moment and I handed him the papers. I've already explained everything to Jake. Things are going to change around here, Evelyn. This is our home, and you don't get to run it anymore. Evelyn's face was a mask of shock and disbelief. For once, she had no words. From that day on, things were different. Jake finally understood the importance of standing up for our marriage, and Evelyn was forced to back off. She no longer had control over our lives, and for the first time, I felt like I had reclaimed my home. It wasn't easy, but in the end, the papers that shocked her were the very thing that saved me.